Hey everyone, it's me, Amy D. McKnight from Davison Fiber Arts, and don't worry, I'm going to be slowing way down and taking you step by step how to weave potholder style, or how to weave a potholder style square on a common threads loom or any standard potholder loom, so stay tuned. So in this video, I'm just going to be giving you some tips and tricks about how I weave squares on potholder style looms, and this is one of the ones that I'm most familiar with because I've been doing it since I was a kid. So here you have the Common Threads loom. You can get the pattern for free at commonthreadsloom.com, and there's also instructions on how to make this loom. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to be making a slip knot. I think that's called slip knot. And the reason why I do this, it just is a little bit simpler for me than to try to find a place to tie it, to secure it so your thread is not going anywhere. I take that slip knot and put it over the top and bottom pegs, tighten it up, and then what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be wrapping the thread around that next one to the left and coming back down beside where I started. So I'm going to come back down beside where I started and then come around and wrap it around the next one to the right. So there's my starting point. I'm coming back down where I started. I'm going to wrap it around. After that, I'm just going to keep going as normal, going up and around, down and around, up and around, down and around. And then I'm going to speed this up in a little bit because I think you get the point. But the most important part is that I make the slip knot, and a little bit later on I'm going to be showing you when we are chaining off the edge to finish it up, when I take that slip knot out and it is a perfect loop. But yeah, I just found that works out simpler than trying to, attach it to an extra peg, and the tension is good all the way around. So I'm just going to keep going up and down, up and down. Now, you may have noticed I am working with 3 strands of yarn. This is probably the lightest weight thread that I would use, and only because the more strands of yarn you're using with this method, or the pin loom style method, or the one where you're weaving kind of diagonal or from the corners, the more you have to fight with the yarn, the more tangly it gets. And so you can use 3 strands of baby weight or sports weight or number 3, so number 3 for weaving potholder style on the Common Threads loom. You'll know you have it right when you end up and you end with your thread between the second to the last peg at the bottom left. And you're going to go around 3 pegs. Okay, so this is the 1/4 inch dowel, and you're going to be using this to make what's called a shed, or a space to pass your tool through as you're weaving. This actually saves you a little bit of time of having to go over, under every other row. So you're going to do it all up front, and what I'm doing is I'm grabbing each of the group of yarn that's around every other peg. I'm not going to say how many, because how many depends on what type of yarn you're using. If you're using a thicker yarn, you're going to have less strands of yarn to grab, but you're just going over, under, just like you would weave. And you see it makes a space that you can use to pass your yarn tool through. That tool that I have there in my hand is a loom knitting tool, and you can find that in the craft supply section with all the loom knitting stuff. So it's a pretty common tool. You can also use a crochet hook, or you can use a barrette, or you can just use your fingers, whatever you have access to. You don't need to get fancy. So the first row, I'm just going to go and weave through that space, or through the row that's created using the shed stick. It's the simplest way, I think, that you can do it. Now, you could do the opposite row to the shed stick. It really doesn't matter, but I find, why make life hard if you don't need to? Now, you'll notice there, you'll see me do it again, but what I do is when I finish weaving a row, I raise up the threads and then raise it up and pull a little bit and straighten them out. That just makes sure that my threads aren't twisted. And you'll see me do it again. Okay, right now I am weaving the opposite row to what the shed stick is in. So I am having to pick up every other, piece, the pieces that were not picked up on this last pass. But the shed stick actually makes it a little bit easier to see the ones that you didn't pick up the last time around. So that is a useful thing to use. And again, you can use that with a standard potholder loom. If you have one, just go get a dowel or a smooth stick or something, and you can use it to make a shed stick to make your weaving go a little bit faster. Now I have woven way too many squares to count, and so I've gotten pretty good at knowing how tightly to pack the thread or to press it down after I've woven a row. You'll see as I go on that I pack it down close enough to get it straight, but not so close that I get rid of the little spaces. You can see there are little teeny weeny spaces, little dots betwixt the sections or the row. You see the little, it's not totally scrunched down. You don't want to pack it too tightly because it will be uneven and you'll have too much space at the top. Neither do you want to leave it too loosely because then you won't be able to weave your top rows. You just want to get it kind of just right where it is in line, perpendicular at right angles to the threads, but not so tight that you don't see a little bit of the base behind it. So you can see little dots of the base poking through, and you haven't packed it too tight. If that doesn't make sense, just leave me a question or comment below and I will clarify what I'm talking about. And so again, I'm going to raise it up a little bit, make that little arc, and then pat it down. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about the yarns that you can use to weave on the common thread loom or any other potholder loom, just to make it simple for you. If you only have like thin yarn, like a 3, then you can use 3 strands of number 3, which is what I'm doing right now. You can also use 2 strands of number 4 weight yarn. That will work. If you use 3 strands, you will just get a more dense or a thicker square, and that's great too. You can use 1 strand of bulky weight yarn. That will give you about the same weight of using 2 strands of the worsted weight yarn, or you can use a single strand of super bulky yarn, which will give you a very thick piece, or a very thick square. I actually made a blanket for my husband for his man cave out of super bulky yarn with just 1 strand, and that thing is so heavy. I cannot even really pick it up. I got to the point where when I was sewing it together, I put it on the floor to sew it together because it was just too big and too heavy to hold. But yeah, it's a very heavy blanket, and he displays it proudly. I feel special. All right. So anyway, you're just going to keep going across. I'm going to speed this up in a little bit so that we can get to the top quicker so you can see the rest of the part. But it's really really straightforward. I think that there's this thing about weaving potholder style, yeah, here I go, it kind of is nostalgic, and I really am looking forward to showing you some new ways to weave in this method because it's really simple, it's really straightforward. I think it's really easy for most people to understand how to do it. If you do want to do like real potholders, you do want to use like a natural fiber, like a wool, or a wool would probably be the best if you can use it for potholders. You can also use a cotton or whatever, but you might not want to use acrylic because you're going to put something hot on it. It's going to melt, so that's just a word to the wise. I'm taking out the shed stick so that I can weave that last row, and you're just going to take your time to weave the last row. A crochet hook may be a little bit easier for some, but I find that this tool works really good because it's not so bulky as to accidentally pop the threads off of the pegs when you're trying to weave the last row. The way that thumbtacks are designed, or push pins are designed by design, the little head of it keeps the threads from popping off, which is useful, but I find that this tool for me works a little bit better than a crochet hook, but you use what you have access to. There's no reason to be super fancy and get this tool if it is not one that's readily available to you, or you just don't have access to it. You are not losing out if you do not have the tool. Just use a barrette or a crochet hook or whatever you have. So now we're going to start chaining. Well, first we're going to measure the yarn. If you measure the yarn, you don't have to do this. You can work in all your ends and then just use an extra piece of yarn to weave or to sew the pieces together if you plan to sew the pieces together. If you don't plan to sew the pieces together, then you don't even need to do what I just did. But if you're planning to sew it together, you can save having to have knots and tie-ons by just leaving an extra long piece before you cut. I'm putting one loop on my hook, and then I'm picking it up off of the peg or the push pin, and I'm pulling the one from the peg through the one on my hook and going across. Pretty straightforward. I think when we were making pot holders when we were kids, we would do this with our fingers or whatever. I do want you to notice that I am working clockwise around the loom. I find some people work counterclockwise, which seems counterintuitive to me, because if you're working clockwise around it, then you're going to be securing the two sides that are loose, that are more likely to ravel if for some reason the work came off the loom. So that's why I do it. Right now I'm going to, remember I made that slip knot to start? Well, I'm just going to carefully undo the slip knot and just like undo it. This is just a little persnickety thing that I do. You don't have to, but I do it so that it just makes the loop lay a little bit flatter. Totally not necessary, but you can do it if you want to. And then you just keep going. When you get to the corner that has that big loop at the, I'm going to speed by it, just treat it like two loops. I've done other videos where I hit that corner. I forgot to stop it when I was doing it, but you'll see me to do it again in another video. But yeah, you're just going to treat that square corner like two loops. Keep going around, and when you get to the end, you're just going to do that last pull through, pull your tail through, and you can stop here, but I am going to just work the tail in and kind of join the beginning chain, or the beginning where I began, to the end by pulling the tail through that beginning and then pulling it back through that last loop, and it kind of joins it all around. And so there you have it, a complete square. If you have any questions, leave them below. If this video was helpful, do let me know. If you're on YouTube, rate, comment, and subscribe. If you're on Instagram, give me a like. And I just want to thank you all for taking time to look at this video, and I want to wish you happy weaving.